Section 2, History of READE, Introduction, From Confusion to Clarity. In Section 1, we looked at how real estate evolved from informal relationships, handshake deals, and old sub-agency practices into a more professional industry built around disclosure, documentation, and consumer protection. Now we move into one of the biggest turning points in Arizona agency practice, the creation of the Real Estate Agency Disclosure and Election Form, commonly known as READE. The READE form helped answer the question that had caused confusion for decades. Who does the broker represent? Why READE became necessary before agency disclosure became common. Many buyers believe the agent showing them homes was automatically their agent. In reality, under the old sub-agency model, that agent was often connected to the seller's side of the transaction. That created a major problem. Imagine a buyer walking through a home and saying, "I really love this house. I would probably pay more if I had to." If the buyer believed the agent was protecting them, they may have thought that statement was confidential. But if the agent was actually representing the seller, that information could benefit the seller. This is exactly why the industry needed clearer disclosure. The birth of READE in Arizona. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, buyer representation was becoming more common across the country. In Arizona, especially in larger markets like Phoenix, brokers and agents were beginning to understand that buyers needed a clearer explanation of representation choices. In March 1992, the Arizona Association of Realtors introduced the Real Estate Agency Disclosure and Election Form, or READE. The purpose was to disclose the types of agency relationships available and allow the client to elect the type of agency relationship they wanted with the broker. What READE did and did not do. The READE form was designed as a disclosure and election form. It explained agency choices, but it did not create an employment agreement by itself. A buyer could sign a READE form with more than one agent and still not be contractually bound to any one broker. This is an important distinction. READE helped explain representation, but a separate written employment agreement was still needed to establish the business relationship, duties, and compensation terms. The three main agency choices. The READE form helped explain the major agency relationships available in a real estate transaction. Buyer's broker. A buyer's broker represents the buyer and not the seller. The broker owes the buyer duties such as loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care, and accounting. Even if compensation comes from the seller or seller's broker, the buyer's broker still owes duties to the buyer. Seller's broker. A seller's broker represents the seller and works to protect the seller's interests. This includes helping the seller seek the best price and terms, while also maintaining duties such as loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, and accounting. Limited representation broker. A broker may represent both the buyer and seller in the same transaction, but only with informed consent from both parties. This creates limitations because the broker cannot fully advocate against one client for the benefit of the other. Confidential information cannot be shared without written consent. Rules updated. Agency is more than a form. Today, Arizona licensees must understand that agency disclosure is not just about getting a signature. It is about making sure the client actually understands the relationship. The updated ADRE materials organize modern professional conduct under R428-1101, licensee duties, R428-1102, property negotiations, and R428-1103, broker supervision and control. These rules remind licensees that agency, disclosure, negotiation, documentation, and broker oversight all work together. A signed form is helpful, but it does not fix a bad explanation. If the client signs something they do not understand, the risk remains. Real-world example, the buyer who signs everything. A buyer meets an agent at a coffee shop before touring homes. The agent slides over several forms and says, "These are just standard forms. Sign here, here, and here." The buyer signs, but does not understand agency, compensation, or whether the agent represents only them. That is not good practice. A better approach would be for the agent to explain who the broker represents, what duties are owed to the client, what limited representation means, how compensation is handled, and what documents create disclosure versus employment. This is the difference between paperwork and professional practice. Compensation is separate from agency. One of the most important points in agency education is that compensation and representation are related, but they are not the same thing. A broker may be paid through one source, but still owe fiduciary duties to the client they represent. The READE material explains that compensation is negotiable and should be documented separately from the agency election. Under R428-701, Compensation sharing disclosure. Brokers must disclose in writing, at least 3 calendar days before closing, the name of each employing broker representing a party who will receive compensation from the transaction. The lesson is simple. Explain agency clearly, explain compensation clearly, and document both properly. Material facts and honest communication. READE also reminds licensees that brokers must exercise reasonable care, honesty, and disclose material facts that could affect the transaction. Arizona law also recognizes certain exceptions to disclosure under ARS Section 32-2156, including certain facts involving death, crime, or health-related conditions connected to the property. That means licensees must know the difference between a required material disclosure and a legally protected non-disclosure issue. The big lesson READE was an important step in moving Arizona real estate away from assumptions and toward informed choice. The form helped buyers and sellers understand that agency relationships are not automatic. They must be explained, selected, documented, and handled carefully. As we move into the next section, we will build on this idea by looking more closely at agency disclosure itself and how agents can explain it in a way that protects the client, the broker, and the transaction. Online discussion questions. Question 1. Why was the READE form important in Arizona real estate? Answer. The READE form was important because it helped buyers and sellers understand the different agency relationships available and allowed them to elect the type of representation they wanted. Question 2. Does signing a READE form automatically create an employment agreement? Answer, no. The READE form is a disclosure and election form. A separate written agreement is needed to establish employment terms and compensation. Question 3. Why is limited representation more complicated than single-party representation? Answer, limited representation is more complicated because the broker represents both the buyer and seller, which creates limits on loyalty, confidentiality, and disclosure. Both parties must give informed consent.